Let's see if you recognize this fairy tale. There once was an old lady who had a small boy that they lived alone, and they had only one way of survival, and that was a cow called Milky White. Well, one day they got up and Milky White was not producing milk. And the old lady wrung her hands and said, "Wow, how are we going to survive?" And her son Jack said, "Well, you don't have to worry. I'll take Milky White to the market today and I'll sell Milky White. And then we can start something else." Well, Mom thought that was an okay idea, but she said, "I don't know, Jack." And he said, "Oh, trust me, I'll get a good deal." And so off they went to the marketplace. Well, they weren't too far down the road, and there was an old man walking up the road. And he said, "Jack, where are you going?" Jack looked at him a little confused. He didn't recognize him, wondered how he knew his name. But he said, "Well, I'm off to the marketplace to sell the cow." And the man said, "Well, I could make you a deal on that cow, Jack." "Jack, how much do you think 5 beans are worth?" "Well, I don't know. 2 in each hand, 1 in my mouth. I'm not real sure." See, Jack wasn't real bright. But the man said, "Well, I want you to know that these are magic beans that I'm selling you, and the plant will grow overnight." "Really?" said Jack. "Really? Well, that sounds like a pretty good deal to me." And so the deal was made, and Jack sold Milky White the cow for 5 beans. Jack turned around, and he hadn't been gone very long, and he got back home. And his mother said, "Jack, why are you home so early? You haven't even had time to get to the market." And Jack said, "Well, I didn't have to get to the market. I was going down the road, and this old man said, I'm looking for a cow. Can I buy your cow?" And so I sold him the cow." And she said, "Really? How much did you get for him, Jack? Did you get $50? Jack said, "No." $100? "No." $200? "No," said Jack. "Well, how much did you get?" Jack, he proudly reached into his pocket and he pulled out and he said, "I sold him for these 5 magic beans." "What?" said Mom. "You sold the cow for 5 stupid beans?" And she took those beans out of his hand and she threw them out the window. And she said, "Jack, you go to your room. No supper for you tonight. I don't know what we're going to do now." So Jack, he went off to his room, saddened because he had failed his mom. And he went up and he fell asleep eventually. And the next morning when he woke up, he noticed his room was still really dark. And he thought, "Wow, that's kind of weird. Why is the room so dark?" And he looked out the window and it was like there was a shade pulled. And so he walked over the window and looked, and he couldn't believe his eyes. There was this giant beanstalk going clear up into the sky. So Jack ran down the stairs, got down to and burst out through the door, and he saw the beanstalk. And he thought, "Wow, we'll be able to eat, but I'm going to have to climb and see where this beanstalk goes." And so Jack went out and he climbed up that beanstalk. He went up and he climbed and he climbed, and it seemed to go on forever until it was even into the clouds. And as he got up there, Jack was a bit frightened and he didn't even want to look down, but he climbed up through that cloud, and pretty soon he came, and there was a path for him to walk on. And Jack, he took that tentative step, and he stepped off onto that path, and he found that it was pretty solid, and so he began to walk and follow that path, and he went, and he'd gone just a little way, and he looked off, and he saw this huge castle in the distance. And so he went, and as he got closer to that castle, the doors were a magnificent size, but Jack was growing hungry. He had left that morning and forgot to eat, and it had taken, it seemed, a long time to get here, and he was really hungry, and so he went up, and there was a big knocker on that door, and he lifted it up, and he banged, and all of a sudden that door swung open, and there stood this woman. And he said, "Please, Mom, could I have something to eat? I forgot to eat breakfast this morning, and I'm really hungry." And she looked at him, and she said, "You shouldn't be here." And Jack says, "Please, I'm hungry." "Okay," she said. "Come on in. We gotta get you fed before my husband comes home, 'cause he won't be happy if he finds you here. He'll make you his dinner." Well, Jack was frightened, but he went into the house, and this huge kitchen, and she took some bread and some butter out, and she slathered that butter on the bread, and she gave it to Jack to eat, and he was eating hungrily and enjoying that bread, and he couldn't imagine what it was like to live there. And all of a sudden there was stomping footsteps. The ground shook. It seemed the whole castle was shaking. And the woman said, "Oh my Jack, you've got to hide." And so she took and she opened the oven door, and Jack jumped inside the oven door. And he hid in there. And pretty soon he heard the door open, and he heard this voice, "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of a Pennsylvania." "Oh, you're mistaken. Yeah, you can't smell a Pennsylvanian in here. You must be smelling that boy you had for dinner last night." "Oh my," thought Jack, and he shrunk back. But he watched through a crack in that door, and the giant of a man sat down at the table and said, "Woman, bring me my dinner." And so she brought this huge dinner and set it out before him. And as he ate, Jack could see that he was getting sleepy. And he said to her, "Woman, bring me my coins that I can count them." And so she brought this bag, and the giant opened it, and inside there were more bags, and they all appeared to be filled with golden coins. And Jack watched as the giant set them on the table, and after he was done eating, he began to count them. And as he was there in that warm room, though, his eyes grew heavy, and eventually he nodded off to sleep. Well, when Jack saw that he was sleeping, he quietly pushed open that door, and he thought, "I've got to get out of here." And he began to run across that room, and as he walked past that table, he reached out and he grabbed one of those bags of coins and began to run. And just as he got to the door, the giant startled awake, and he said, Where did my coins go?" Jack slipped out the door, and he ran quickly, and he ran down that path and found that beanstalk, and he got on the beanstalk, and he crawled down the beanstalk. And he got down to the beanstalk, and as he went into the house, and he's all in, "Mom, Mom, look what I have." And she got up and said, there's nothing for breakfast this morning either because you sold our cow. But Mom, look at there's the beanstalk, and it's not only full of beans, but I want you to I climbed it today, and I want to show you what I found. And he held out his hand, and it was full of golden coins. And that mother said, wow, where did you get those, Jack? Well, I climbed up that beanstalk, said Jack, and I got them up there. So they took those coins and they began to live off of those coins. And they lived for quite some time. But one day, Mom said, Jack, this is the last coin. We can only eat for one more day. And then there'll be nothing left. Jack says, don't worry. I know what I'll do. I'll go back up the beanstalk and see if I can find some more of those coins. So the next morning, early in the morning, Jack got up and he went out and he climbed up that beanstalk. He went up there as far as he could go, and he quickly went through the cloud. And once again, he came to the path. And he got to the path, and when he got to the path, he got off and he followed that path back to the house. And again, he pounded on the door, and the woman opened the door and said, How dare you come back here? You stole my husband's coins. And Jack said, well, I'm sorry, but I was so hungry, and my mom and I needed to eat, and would you just feed me again? Well, that lady, she looked down and she felt sorry for Jack once again. So she invited Jack into the house, and Jack came into the house. And when Jack got into the house, she fed him again, and sure enough, in the middle of his meal, he heard those pounding steps again, and he ran and he hid once again in that oven, and that giant come in, and he smelled around and he said, Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of a Pennsylvania. Where is he, woman? She said, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no Pennsylvanian here. Wow, I'm hungry. And she said, well, I have those ducks that you got yesterday, and bring them out and feed me. And so she went back and she brought those ducks out and she put them on the table with all kinds of vegetables and other things for the giant to eat. And Jack enviously watched him from within the edge of the oven. And once again, that giant said, woman, bring me my harp. And so she brought him the harp. And he took that harp and he said to the harp, play. And Jack watched in amazement as the harp began to play. As if a ghost was sitting there, the strings began to play among themselves, and beautiful music came out of that harp. And as the harp played, the giant once again nodded off to sleep. And the harp began to play a little quieter and a little quieter, until finally the giant was sound asleep, so deeply asleep that he snored with a snore that rattled the castle. Jack slipped out of the oven, ran past that table and thought, that harp, I could use that harp. And he grabbed that harp and he took off with the harp. And he got down to the beanstalk and he tucked that harp under his arm, and he climbed down the beanstalk, and he got downstairs, down to the bottom, and he said, Mom, look what I found. Did you find more coins? No, I didn't find any coins, but boy, look at what I found. I found a magic harp that plays by itself. He looked at a harp and said, play. And the harp played, but it was a sorrowful music. And they could find places that wanted that sorrowful music, and they used it to make a little money, and they ate for a while. But one day Mom said, Jack, I'm still really hungry. I need more than this harp provides. And Jack says, well, okay, let me go back, and maybe this time I can find some golden coins again. And so Jack climbed up that beanstalk. He climbed and he climbed and he climbed for it seemed half the day. And finally going up through the clouds, and once again he came to that path, and he stepped off and he followed that path to the door. And he knocked on the door with that huge knocker. And the door crept open, and this woman, once again furious, how dare you come back? First you steal my husband's coins, and now you've stolen his harp. He more than wants to make a meal out of you. How dare you come back? Jack said, but I'm so hungry, and so is my mom. I just need a meal once again. Well, he wasn't even in the house, and he heard those steps coming. And so did the woman. She heard them, and as those pounding steps came, she grabbed him and pulled him in, and there was a cauldron in the middle or on the side of the kitchen, and she stuffed him in the cauldron. And the giant of a man came in, and he sniffed around. Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of a Pennsylvania. Where is that Pennsylvania? I'll grind up his bones and make my bread. No, said the woman. There's no Pennsylvanian here. It's your imagination again. Well, that giant of a man, he frowned, and he was sure he smelled a Pennsylvania, but he couldn't find one. And so he sat at the table and once again sat down to a feast. And Jack could smell that feast, and he hid away in that cauldron. And after a while, as he finished eating, the giant looked at his wife and said, bring me the golden goose. Jack watched as she went out and came back with this beautiful white goose. And the giant looked at him and said, lay. And amazingly, the goose laid a golden egg. The man looked at that egg, and as he sat there holding it, his eyes grew heavy, and he fell asleep once again. And as he snored, Jack thought, well, if I could just get that egg, that egg would feed us for a long time. And so he slipped out of that cauldron, and as he started across the room, he thought, wait a minute. If I don't want the egg, I want the goose. And so he grabbed the goose and he began to run. And as he ran out the door, the goose began to squawk and make all kind of racket and woke the giant up. And as Jack looked back, the giant leapt up and began to chase him with those long giant strides. And he was gaining on Jack. he kept getting closer and closer, and Jack could see the beanstalk ahead, and he thought, I'm just going to make it. And he got to the beanstalk, and he shoved that goose in his shirt, and he began to climb down, but he could really only use one hand holding the goose. And so as he's going down, he got up just down below the clouds, and all of a sudden he could feel the whole beanstalk shaking, and he was so afraid, but he kept going and going and going. And as he got nearer the ground, he looked up, and there was the giant crawling down the beanstalk after him. And Jack was so afraid. But when he got to the bottom, as he got towards the bottom, he hauled out, Mom, bring me the axe. Mom, bring me the axe. There's a giant following me. And Mom looked up, and she saw she saw the beanstalk beginning to sway back and forth, and she could see the legs of the giant. She ran over and she grabbed the axe, and as Jack got to the bottom of the beanstalk, he looked up, and he wasn't sure he was going to make it, but he began to chop. He handed his mother the goose, and he began to chop at the bottom. And the giant was angrily coming down, and the beanstalk began to sway, and all of a sudden the bottom snapped off, and the beanstalk come whipping down, and the giant fell with him. And Jack realized that the beanstalk had killed the giant, but he had also killed the beanstalk. But he still had the golden goose. And so Jack and his mother were able to live from the money from the golden eggs that the goose laid. And they lived happily ever after. I hope you've enjoyed my version of Jack and the Beanstalk.